Welcome to Frisco Public Library's very first virtual Lone Star Storytelling Festival, brought to you by the Frisco Public Library Foundation. My name is Kayla Wardell, and I am a library assistant and student storytelling coach for this year's Storytelling Festival. We are so excited to bring you the virtual performances of 5 of our returning student tellers. We have coached these students and watched them grow from novice tellers to the talented young professionals you see today. Their stories will range from folk and fairy tales to spooky stories and ancient mythology. Please celebrate with us the timeless art of storytelling as we participate in ushering this art from the fires of the earliest humans to the homes, schools, and devices of our virtual world. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Dam, and I'm going to be telling you the story, Pandora's Box. Now, to truly understand this story, we're going to have to go a little ways back before Pandora was ever even alive, and to a time where gods ruled over the earth. And one of those gods was Zeus, and he ruled over all of them. Now, another one of these gods was Prometheus. And Prometheus was a little bit different from the rest of his peers. He loved humans, and he just truly believed that they had such a great potential. But like I said, he was pretty different, and most of the gods around him couldn't stand humans. They just thought they were puny little beings who didn't have much going for them. But Prometheus knew that if they just had a little nudge, they could be so much more successful. So he hatched a plan. He snuck into the center hearth of the gods and grabbed some fire. Then he crept down from the heavens onto earth, and he placed the fire into their center hearth and crept back up into the heavens. Now, humans had never had fire before, and he knew that if they just had it, they could stay warm, they could cook their food. It'd be a great place to gather. So he went to bed knowing he had done something right. But when he woke up, Zeus was standing in front of him. He was furious. How dare Prometheus go behind his back and help these puny little humans? He was so furious that he exiled Prometheus to an eternity of torture, far, far away from the gods. Now, this punishment may seem pretty severe, and there isn't much more action you need to take. But Zeus was not a very forgiving man. He was still angry, and he knew he had to get more punishment onto the rest of Prometheus's family. Luckily for him, Prometheus had a brother. His name was Epimetheus. And while Epimetheus was not the smartest guy, he knew well enough to avoid the gods, especially Zeus, for they still held a grudge on his family. So he lived in a little house far, far away from the rest of the gods, and he had a pretty simple life. But he always knew in the back of his head that Zeus was out to get him. And Zeus always had in the back of his head some sort of plan to get back at Prometheus and Epimetheus. Until one day, Zeus had a brilliant idea. He gathered together a council of the gods, and they all hatched out a plan. They were going to build a woman for Epimetheus to fall in love with. Now, as they built this woman, they made her beautiful, kind, lovely, intelligent, and wise. But most of all, they made her curious. And they sent her off to Epimetheus' house where she could spend the rest of her life. Now, Epimetheus looked out his window. He was pretty confused when he saw someone standing there. He was even more confused when he opened the door and saw a beautiful woman. She introduced herself as Pandora, and he let her inside, and they soon began to become very good friends, and eventually they fell in love. They got married and didn't have many worries for the rest of their life, until one day there came another visitor at the door. They were confused, but opened the door wide, and out there was a stranger holding a box. They had never seen this man before, and he didn't introduce himself. He simply held out the box to them as a gift. They were a little wary, but decided to take it instead. And just as they were about to close the door, the man yelled out, "Never open this box." Now, that was a little concerning, but they decided to not pay it much attention and just put it on a shelf in their house and went back to what they were doing. And they kept on living their lives until about a week later, Pandora could not fall asleep. All she could think about was what was in that box. It was all that was coming over her. So she decided to creep out of her room and go into the room where the box was held. She pulled out a stepladder, placed it in front of the shelf, and climbed up, up, up to the top. She grabbed the box, pulled it back down, and she was just about to open it. She thought, no, I mustn't. We were told not to. I shouldn't open it. So she placed the box back onto the shelf and went back to bed. And she was about to fall asleep until she couldn't. She couldn't stop thinking about that box. So she crept back out of her room, climbed up, up, up the stepladder, and pulled the box back down. And she was just about to open it when, oh, no, I can't. It's not the right thing to do. So she placed the box back up and was just about to leave the room until she thought, I can't take it anymore. I'm too curious. I have to see what's in the box. So, for the final time, she climbed up, up, up the stepladder and pulled the box back down. And very, very slowly started to open it. And out came pain, disease, sickness, sadness. All of these cursed things flew out of the box, filled her home, and filled the rest of the world. She was devastated, and she dropped to her knees, sobbing, knowing what she had just done. She couldn't think of anything else except for what a terrible thing she had just filled the earth with. Until out of the box came a blinding light. She looked up and saw hope. Hope was a light that filled her room, filled the rest of the house, and went out into the rest of the world, following all of the terrible things that had just come out of the box. For even in our darkest times, hope is always with us. Thank you.
My name is Marin Delgadillo, and this is the story Humpty Dumpty Revamped. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. The end. But that makes for a very short, boring, nonsensical story, right? Let's try that again, shall we? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall and narrowly avoided having a great fall because all the king's horses and all the king's men said, "Do not sit there. It's windy, my friend." Humpty considered their words. Sitting on top of walls was absurd. So he carefully climbed down until his feet touched the ground, and the king of safety, Humpty, was crowned. Humpty worked at a pace that was brisk. He made signs, he made rules, helping all avoid risk. "Don't sit there! Don't stand there! Be careful! Up high!" He ordered, he pestered, and he wasn't shy. Eventually, the people had all had enough. His signs and his rules prevented fun stuff. When there was something to do or some place to go, Humpty placed warnings that all said, "No, no, 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 no! All I want to do is jump over that candlestick. I promise I'm nimble. I swear that I'm quick. Our family needs water. We must fill this pail. Our children, Jack and Jill, surely won't fail. Excuse me, but I have to run as fast as I can, or they're going to catch me," said the gingerbread man. Soon, all the king's horses and all the king's men grew tired of his rules and wanted them to end. So, while Humpty slept, though it took them some time, they went around town and changed a few signs. At dawn, Humpty arose with a smirk. He walked around town to inspect all his work. "Oh no! Who did this? They really should not." He needed to sit and found the perfect spot. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, and when the wind blew, had a great fall. All all the king's horses and all the king's men would never have to listen to Humpty again. Yay! But when Humpty landed hard on the ground, he did not break, he bounced. Up and down, bouncing, not broken. What was the matter? He was an egg after all. He should have splattered and shattered. All the king's horses and all the king's men were very confused, while Humpty kept on bouncing, looking quite amused. Boinga, 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 boinga. Their plans to get rid of Humpty had been spoiled because, to be safe, Humpty had himself hard-boiled. The end.
Hello, my name is Sachi Dodamani, and today I will be telling you all the story Uwangalema. Once there was a place where a lot of animals lived, and in this place there had been no rain. With no rain, that meant all the plants had dried up and shriveled away. But the animals needed those plants so they could eat and grow, so they got real hungry. But in the middle of this place stood a great, big, tall, enormous tree. And at the top of that tree was every fruit you can imagine. And the animals, they wanted that fruit, but could never get any of it. The elephant tried shaking the tree, but none of the fruit would ever fall. The giraffe tried stretching her long neck up, but could never stretch high enough. The monkeys tried climbing the trees, but could never climb high enough. Even the birds couldn't fly high enough. So the king had a meeting. Lion said, "How are we going to get the fruit down from the tree?" And just then, the wise owl remembered. Well, according to a legend, there lives a wise old woman on the other side of the mountain. Maybe if we send someone over, she'll tell us how to get the fruit down. All the animals agreed that that was a great idea. So who should they send? They were looking around and saw Cheetah. "Cheetah," said Lion, "you're the one. You can run faster than anyone else. Will you go over the mountain?" Cheetah said, "Count on it," and started racing up the mountain. And in no time was at the wise old woman's house. Thump, 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 creak. And there stood the wise old woman. "Yes," she said, "may I help you?" "Yes, you can," said Cheetah. "I need to know how to get the fruit down from the tree in my village." "Ah, yes," she said. "I know that tree. That's a magical tree. And there's a magical word, and that word is Uwangalema. If you stand under that tree and say the word, all of the fruit is going to come right to you." "Thanks," said Cheetah, and started sprinting up the mountain. Oh, how that Cheetah could run, feet thumping, chest pounding. He was going so fast he forgot where to look, and thump! He crashed into a tree. When Cheetah got back on all fours again, he wasn't so sure about that word anymore. When he got back to the tree, he tried to remember that word. Abracadabra! Mango tango? But none of the fruit fell down, and he had to say, "I forgot." "Who shall we send next?" said Lion. "It's okay if you're fast, but if you can't remember anything, then what good is it? We need someone who can remember things for a long time." "Elephant," he said, "you're the one. Will you go over the mountain?" Elephant said, "Yeah, I could go over the mountain, and I can remember that word." Elephant started up the mountain, and she wasn't so slow herself, and was at the wise old woman's house. Thump, 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 creak, and there stood the wise old woman. "Yes," she said, "may I help you?" "Yes, you can. I need to know how to get the fruit down from that tree in my village." "Ah, yes," said the wise old lady. "I know that tree. That's a magical tree, and there's a magical word, and that word is Uwangalema. If you stand under the tree and say that word, all of the fruit is going to come right to you." "Thanks," said Elephant, and started up the mountain. And all the while she was talking to herself. How could Cheetah forget that word? Anyone can remember it. A worm can, and even a baby could. And when she reached the top of the mountain, she decided it was time for a quick nap. When she got back up, She wasn't so sure about that word anymore. When she made it back to the tree, she tried to remember that word, chimichanga, Expelliarmus. But none of the fruit fell down, and she had to say, I forgot. Who shall go now? Said the lion. And just then they heard a small little voice coming from somewhere. I'll go over the mountain, it called out. They tried to look for who it was. Turtle, they said. Turtle, what makes you think you can go over the mountain? You're so slow. I think I can do it, said Turtle. Just give me a chance. Oh, all right. See you in a million years or so. And yes, Turtle was very slow, but he eventually made it to the wise old woman's house. Thump, 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 creak. And there stood the wise old woman. Yes, she said, may I help you? Yes, you can, said Turtle. I need to know how to get the fruit down from the tree in my village. Ah, yes, she said. I know that tree. That's a magical tree, and there's a magical word, and that word is Uwangalema. If you stand under the tree and say that word, all of the fruit is going to come right to you. Thanks, said Turtle, and started back up the mountain. Now, every time he took a step, he'd sing to himself, Uwangalema, then the other, Uwangalema, Uwangalema. And he kept on singing until he reached the top of the mountain. Uwangalema, Uwangalema, Uwangalema. And finally, he made it to the tree. He took a deep breath and said, Uwangalema. Just then, all of the fruit started falling down, and the animals ate and ate. And they said, thanks, Turtle, for going over that mountain. Thanks, Turtle, for coming back to us. And especially, thank you, Turtle, for remembering that word. Do you guys still remember it? Say it with me. Uwangalema. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shivani D, and today I will be telling you all the tale of Tricky Fox. One day, Tricky Fox was bragging to Sissy Fox. Stealing chickens is too easy, he said. I'm gonna go get me a fat pig.
Well, started Sissy Fox, there ain't no fox in this whole wide woods that can even carry a fat pig.
I could, exclaimed Tricky Fox, if I were to somehow fool a human being into putting one in a sack for me. I could, I'll show you. And with that, Tricky Fox picked up his sack and took off into the woods. Tricky Fox ran and kept on running, just before it started to get dark. Then he stopped, picked up a little piece of wood, put it in a sack, and knocked on the door of a nearby cottage. When a lady came to answer the door, Tricky Fox hunched over as though he were feeble, and in a rickety voice he said, The night grows cold, and I'm so old, please let me stay.
I'll let you stay, said the old lady, but no tricks.
Oh no, exclaimed Tricky Fox. I'm just worried about my sack is all. I wouldn't want for anyone to look in it, and I'm too tired to guard it.
Leave it with me, said the old lady. I won't look in your sack.
I know you won't, grinned Tricky Fox as he handed his sack to the old lady and pretended to fall asleep. But this lady could not resist a quick peek in Tricky Fox's sack. Just a piece of wood, she said to herself, as she blew out her candles, pulled up her covers, and went to sleep. And pretty soon, Tricky Fox heard her snoring, so he went over, tippy-toe, picked out that piece of wood and threw it in the fireplace, and sure enough, went to sleep. The next morning, Tricky Fox held up his empty sack, and he said, What's happened to my loaf of bread?
You didn't have
the old lady began to say, before she remembered that she wasn't supposed to know what was in the sack. Too embarrassed to admit it, she said, Must have been the mice. I'll give you one of mine. So she took Tricky Fox's sack and headed over to her bread box, and she put a loaf of her bread in Tricky Fox's sack. She handed his sack back. Tricky Fox grabbed it, said a thank you, and took off into the woods. And as he ran, he laughed and danced to this sassy song. I'm so clever, tee-hee-hee-hee. Trick, trick, tricky, yes sirree. Snap your fingers, slap your knees. Humans ain't smart, not like me. And all day long, Tricky Fox hung out in the woods just before it started getting dark. Then he knocked on the door of a nearby cottage. And all over again, Tricky Fox managed to trick his way from that loaf of bread to a chicken. This time, when Tricky Fox knocked on the door, another lady came to answer it. And when she did, Tricky Fox hunched over as though he were feeble, and in a rickety voice he said, "The night grows cold, and I'm so old, please let me stay." "I'll let you stay," said this lady, "but no tricks." "Oh no," cried Tricky Fox. "I'm just worried about my sack is all. I wouldn't want for anyone to look in it, and I'm too tired to guard it." "Leave it with me," said the old lady. "I won't look in your sack." "I know you won't," grinned Tricky Fox as he handed over his sack to the lady and pretended to fall asleep. But even this lady could not resist just a quick peek in Tricky Fox's sack. "Just a chicken," she said to herself as she went to sleep. And pretty soon, when Tricky Fox heard her snoring, he went over, tippy-toe, picked up the chicken with one arm, lifted up the window with another, and said, "Be free," and sure enough, went to sleep. The next morning, Tricky Fox held up his empty sack, and he said, "What's happened to my pig?" "You didn't have," the lady began to say, before she remembered that she wasn't supposed to know what was in the sack. Too embarrassed to admit it, she said, "Must have slipped out the door. I'll give you one of mine." So she took Tricky Fox's sack and headed over to her pig pen. But when the coast was clear, Tricky Fox laughed and danced to this sassy song. "I'm so clever, tee-hee-hee-hee. Trick, trick, tricky, yes sirree. Snap your fingers, slap your knee. Humans ain't smart, not like me." Now, one thing that Tricky Fox hadn't counted on was that this particular lady was a teacher, and teachers aren't as easy to fool as regular human beings are. And now this lady had gotten suspicious, so she'd come around to the side of her house, only to watch Tricky Fox laugh and dance to a sassy song. "That rascal," she said, "I'll teach him." So instead of going to her pig pen, she went to her doghouse, and instead of putting a pig in Tricky Fox's sack, she put in her bulldog. So she came back with Tricky Fox's sack and handed it over to him. Tricky Fox grabbed it, said a thank you, and took off into the woods. He couldn't wait to show Sissy Fox what he had gotten. And as soon as he got home, Tricky Fox untied the sack. And to his sorry surprise, out jumped the lady's bulldog. He bit him high, he bit him low. He made their fur just fly, fly, fly. And to this day, foxes have learned a very important lesson. They've learned to be more respectful of humans. And this is also why you never hear foxes singing their sassy songs. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Aparna Balaji, and today I will be telling the story of On a Dark and Stormy Night. Everyone knows my house. It sits all by itself on the biggest hill in town. It's always windy up there, so it's a great place to fly kites. But it gets a little scary when there's a storm around. One night, I was at my desk doing my homework when a terrible thunderstorm blew up. Lightning flashed, thunder crashed, and rain pounded up against the window. Suddenly, I heard a strange screech, screech, screech on my window. I thought it was just the branches of the old oak tree, so I went back to my studying. But then I heard that same screech, screech, screech again. So I went to the window and opened the shade. And I looked through the window and almost fainted. There stood a creepy old woman, rain pouring down her face, her clothes dripping wet. But what really surprised me were her lips and fingernails. They were both painted the brightest shade of red that I had ever seen. And then she started to talk. Do you want to know what I do with these long red fingernails and red lips? No, I shouted, and I pulled down the shade. A couple of weeks later, I was in bed, reading a pretty good book, and I had forgotten all about that old lady with the long red fingernails and red lips. It was another dark and stormy night, and I heard that same screech, screech, screech on my window. I didn't want to go to the window, but it felt as if a strange force was pulling me there. So I went to it and opened the shade. And sure enough, that same creepy old woman was there. And again she asked, Do you want to know what I do with these long red fingernails and red lips? No, I shouted, and I pulled down the shade. At school, I was always daydreaming, and I couldn't work. What did she do with those long red fingernails and red lips? I couldn't eat, and I couldn't sleep. So I was determined that on the next dark and stormy night, I would ask her. Well, soon enough, the next dark and stormy night arrived. And as soon as I heard that same screech, screech, screech on my window, I went to it and opened it up. This time, I begged her, What do you do with those long red fingernails and red lips? And I watched as she took one of her long red fingernails and put it up to her red lips and went, Thank you.